Good morning, everyone. I'm David McMillan. We're doing a study on the book of John. This is our lesson 10. Before we get started, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Father God, we love you so much, and we thank you for all the things that are in your book. We thank you for your Son who died on the cross, and we thank you for his time we have to spend learning more about him. And we pray that today, as we go through the lesson, we can find something which we can apply to our everyday lives. Pray all this in your Son's name. Amen. All right. Sorry I was running a little late, so I got to let that adrenaline cool down just a sec. Or we'll be through in 15 minutes. So, now if you've been in this class, you may wonder why I changed the look of my slides, or you may not. But I got a new set of slides, and I'm really happy with them. And part of the reason I changed it is because this last part is really interesting. When you look at the book of John, you see the whole ministry of Jesus from the baptism to the death. But once we get to chapter 7, chapter 12, you're basically looking at a very short time frame. You're looking at a week. You're talking about the Passion Week, and you have several chapters of that. So it's going to be kind of interesting. Basically, you can take all the lessons of that. It's almost like a stream of consciousness. It's all the lessons are connected. But we're going to go through it, and we'll do a little preview up to chapter 13 today. But the question up on the screen is the question that probably most of you haven't ever answered. If you had 1 week left on the planet, what would you do with it? What would you do with that time? And I think in Jesus' case, he would do at least one thing that we would probably also do, and that's spend a little time with close friends over a meal and just enjoy each other's company. And that's something that's not that unusual. But one of the things that happens in John chapter 12 is often conflated with something that happens in Luke chapter 7. So what I want to do is I want to start out by going over the story in Luke chapter 7, and then we'll talk about it a little, and then we'll move on. So, in Luke chapter 7, Jesus is spending some time with a friend named Simon the Pharisee. And let's just go ahead and begin reading. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now, this is very similar to what's going to happen today in John. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. Now, your version may have some more strong language. When she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, my picture is wrong because she's in front of him here, but standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wipe them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed him with the ointment. Verse 40 continues saying, and Jesus answering said to him. Now, basically what happened in between there is the Pharisees were saying, hey, this is a woman of ill repute. If he's really a prophet, he'll be able to figure out that this is not the kind of woman he needs to be associating with. So how does Jesus respond in verse 40? Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, "Say it, teacher. A certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. Now, when they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more?" Simon answered, "The one, I suppose, for whom he has canceled the larger debt." And he said to him, "You've judged rightly." It's a very simple illustration. Verse 44. Then turning towards the woman, which, as we said before, was behind him, so I suppose he's turning his back sort of to Simon. He said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little." Now, the reason I brought this story into it, to me, it gives us a little set of reference for the story we're going to talk about today. Part of it, it's a little bit hard to get some of this because this is all in first century sort of customs. All this thing would be completely bizarre today. So I thought one of the things that's very interesting in how Jesus describes this scene is he described it in a way that made me think about the art of hospitality. Now, the art of hospitality is something that we still have today, but it's one of those things that's getting a little bit weirder. Part of the reason it's getting weirder is because adults, when they come over or go out to eat, how often do you see people, looking at the phone and not talking to each other? We kind of have little built-in babysitters so that we can zone out, not have to worry about people. So sometimes that personal touch, that connection is lost, and it's made things different. And then also, it's just the availability of entertainment is so prevalent. Sometimes the art of conversation is lost. I find myself guilty with that. But when a person comes over, they should never feel unwelcome. And that happens sometimes. I felt that way before, not very often, but I felt that way before, where you feel like you're just a second thought. You should feel welcomed. You shouldn't feel self-conscious. If you go to someone's house, they're doing a lot of things in the background, you start feeling guilty, like, hey, maybe I should help you. And they go, oh, no, and it just makes you feel self-conscious. You should feel relaxed. You should feel comfortable, not uncomfortable. You should feel not unimportant. And that's probably really the biggest thing of all. If you've ever been to someone's house and you felt like you didn't really need to be there, do you have a pleasant time? If you don't feel like you're part of the group, do you have a good time? No, you don't. You should feel honored. And you shouldn't have to compete for attention. You should be not, I put here the center of attention. If you're the only guest, I hope you're the center of attention. But if there's more than one guest, you don't have to be the center. But, and I've thought about this because a lot of times when you have people over, you spend a lot of time worrying about what are we going to make, and et cetera, et cetera. You're worried about the logistics of things. And when I think back to all the good times I've spent with friends, I've never, called them up and go, I really enjoyed that visit I had with you. You had such good service. The service was impeccable. The meal, fantastic. Well, everything was beautiful. I wouldn't say that. I would always talk about, I just love talking about the old times. I enjoyed the time I spent with you. And that's really the art of hospitality. Can you balance the meal and the prep with the time placed, valuing the guest? And it's really about valuing the other people. Now, Hospitality, in all honesty, I've never seen a lesson on this. I felt a little funny because normally when you have lessons on things you're supposed to do, they're kind of things you don't naturally want to do or kind of unpleasant. Hospitality is fun. It's fun to have people over, so it feels kind of guilty. It's like, but the Bible really encourages that. I mean, if you look at Romans 12, which, if you don't want to pick it out for this verse, just read Romans 12. Romans 12 is such a great chapter in the Bible, perhaps one of the best. We can't forget verse 13, though. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. So, seeking to show hospitality. I know the first century world was different. I mean, people are traveling, less hotels, that kind of thing. But seek to show hospitality. But if you keep going, it gets kind of stronger. Hebrews 13, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. And then you get to Luke 14. Luke 14 kind of hit me in a way because I don't know that I've done this. But this is Jesus talking, so whenever Jesus talks, you should listen and pay attention. He says, but when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. The part before that, he says, well, hey, it's fine and dandy if you're well off. You can have somebody over and invite them over, but you're going to get paid back because they're going to invite you over, and it's going to be an equitable thing. But there's something really honorable in entertaining guests that can't repay that. Now, what does that look like in 2025? I don't know. I just don't know. I need more time to think about it. But I mean, I certainly don't think that it has to be in your home. I certainly think that you could invite somebody out to a restaurant or something like that. But I think one of the points that we really need to consider whenever we're trying to help someone, what matters somewhat more than what we do for them is that we have a connection with them. If we're just providing them food, it's not as meaningful. If you're providing them more than food, if you're providing them a personal connection, that means more. And Jesus emphasizes that in this story. And it sort of gives you a different take. And when you look at it that way, then we can look at John, to me, in a more realistic way. So why don't I have that attitude of gratitude? You know, if you love much, you're forgiven much. If you love little, we're forgiven little. I kind of like to think of it this way, though, in my mind. Haven't we all been forgiven much? Perhaps if we think we've been forgiven little, we're not really doing a good self-evaluation. Maybe we need to think about all the things he's forgiven us for and be more grateful. Maybe that's the message. So I think we've all been forgiven much. So let's go back to John 11, and we'll talk some more. One thing about this last meal is with Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha are kind of unique in the history of Jesus because they're friends and that Jesus loved, but they're not mentioned except for these dinner parties. So it happens a couple of times. And then also in the resurrection of Lazarus. That's John chapter 11. Now, in John chapter 11, verse 21, Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you had not been here, or if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, he's saying that because there was a delay between the time he got the message and the time he arrived. And that is a statement that I think she's been talking to her sister about, because her sister says the exact same thing. I think they're just saying to themselves, you know, if he had been here, he wouldn't have died. And that asks that question, that hidden question is, well, why did you let him die? But Martha takes it a step forward, and Martha has a different approach. One thing about Martha is when Martha approaches Jesus, she meets him where he is. She doesn't meet him at the tomb. She goes to where he is, and then she has this excitement about her that's different from her sister, because her sister is just a mess back home. And verse 22, she says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And to me, that's just such a huge statement of faith. Right after you lost your brother, he was beloved by Jesus. She's dealing with that. But she says, I know, even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day," which is as good of a statement of faith as she could give, because this is exactly what Jesus was talking about earlier, about how he would be there on the last day at the resurrection of the dead. He's going to raise everyone. So it's a beautiful statement of faith. And I like to think of 2 Corinthians 3, since we have such a hope, we're very bold. To me, these are bold statements. I mean, this is at a funeral. And it's just such a powerful thing to be so hopeful at a funeral and seeing Jesus. And that's just because she had such great faith. Now, what does Jesus say to her? Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." And then the kicker is, do you believe this? Here she is at a funeral. She said these great confessions of faith, and she's saying, he gives her one more. He ups it. He says, "Look, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this?" What does she say? She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." And that's as good a declaration of faith as anybody that makes in any of the Gospels. It's as good as any of them. And I just find it inspiring. Martha here understands who Jesus is. And Martha has a great hope. And whenever you see that confession, I always think Matthew 10, "Therefore everyone who confesses me before people, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven." The confession is such an important step in the lives of every Christian. To hear her say that at this time of sorrow is amazing. But then we get to the sister. The sister is a mess back home. Martha says, "Mary, come see Jesus." Now, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. And I don't know how I missed that last time, but she just fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." This is all that they were just saying this probably to themselves the whole time when Jesus was gone. If he had been here, he wouldn't have died. If he had been here, he wouldn't have died. That's all that's going through her mind. She's not thinking hope. She's just sad. And here's, we look at Martha and we look at Mary because we want to compare them, because that's just what everyone does. Both Martha and Mary had great faith. They had faith in God, and they had faith in Jesus. We know that. He loved them. They had a great relationship, yet Martha and Mary dealt with the grief of the death of their brother differently. And sometimes when we're grieving, it's hard to hold on to hope for the future. And that's just the truth. I know that in my personal set of grieving, whenever I'm grieving, I don't like to hear positive statements. I just like to grieve. Because it just falls flat. And so how does Jesus react to Mary? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. We talked about that last week for a minute, but greatly troubled here, the words used basically can mean both anger and grief. And that's sort of what grief is like for a lot of people. You're not happy about it. You're angry about it. Or you're sad. Or you vacillate. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Verse 35, Jesus wept. So how did Jesus react to the weeping that was going on? It's right there. And here's the point of that, to me, that's good, that goes with this. Jesus reacted to Martha's faith by giving her this shot, this chance to reaffirm that faith right before him. And Jesus reacted to Mary's tears with tears of his own. And I think John 10 really goes for that. I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Who knew what Mary needed better than Jesus? Who knew what Martha needed better than Jesus? And Romans 12, going back to Romans 12, I could spend all day in Romans 12. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. I just think it just shows the depth of his love for these people by the way he reacted to them. So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." Now, you're going to notice this shift in Jesus. Jesus is going to go from, let's not make a big deal about this, to the hour has come for me to be glorified. And so things are going to be more public from here on out. So when he had said these things, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So, what happens when Lazarus is raised from the dead? What's the post-resurrection story? One thing that's interesting about Lazarus is he becomes a celebrity. He is instant celebrity because there's a lot of people that liked Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And when they hear a guy who's been raised from the dead, that kind of generates a lot of interest. And so, because of Lazarus being raised from the dead, he had the prayer here, he prayed in front of a lot of people. It created a lot of followers, a lot of interest. And that just helped accelerate Jesus' path to the cross. In John 11, verse 47, we see the reaction from the bad guys. Here the bad guys start planning. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." This is one thing that I really had forgotten that this was even in there, but suddenly we see at least a motive for the bad guys here. What they're afraid of is that Jesus, acting like a king, is going to call the Romans to take their iron fist and put a tighter grip on Jerusalem. And they didn't know how to deal with that. Caiaphas, the high priest, he thinks he knows the answer. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." Now, why is he saying this? He did not say this of his own accord. This is the interesting part. But being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. But Caiaphas didn't understand what that meant. Caiaphas was thinking, I'm going to kill Jesus. It's going to quell this rebellion that's being sparked. And what's going to happen is all the Jews will realize that, hey, everything's safe here. Let's all come back to Jerusalem. Then we'll have an uprising, overthrow our Roman captors, and things will be the way they should be. But what he's saying here is that Christ, when he's lifted up, he'll draw all nations to himself. That is really the prophecy that he was prophesying, not understanding what he was doing. Okay, let's go. I know this is a little bit of an odd lesson, but I just don't know. It's really interesting. First time I've ever taught Mary and Martha, and it's I've done the best job I know how to do. I promise you that. All right, so let's go back to John chapter 11, verses 57 through 12:1. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Now Bethany is not exactly in Jerusalem, so he's a little bit staying in hiding. Verse 2 says, so they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table. Now, when they're reclining at the table, that's more of a feast, just FYI, in case you're wondering. They had this weird custom. It's sort of Passover related, but they put pillows up on the floor, and you just kind of lean back. That's one of the reasons why they did the foot washing, because your feet are kind of food level, so it's kind of gross if they're dirty. Everybody will be less excited about your food if they see your dirty feet. But here's one thing that's interesting about Martha. The word they use here for serve is diakonio, to serve, to minister. That is the word where we get the word deacon from. So Martha always being serving, is that a bad thing? No, we're commanded to serve. Service is part of the Christian lifestyle. But we always, when we think of Martha, we always go back to the story in Luke 10. And so let's talk about that story in Luke 10. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. That seems like a very reasonable thing. I don't know too many people that can read that and not feel a little bit for Martha. And Martha was a little bit gutsy, saying, hey, yeah, she's done. Come back here. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her. There was a verse I looked at. I don't really know exactly how this lesson came together, but for some reason all these things make sense, so hopefully they make sense to you. But I was thinking about that first story. It was like, well, she loves much, and Simon didn't love much. And so where's the Bible verse about love? And I thought, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. That's in Mark 12. That's the one that has the 4. If you go to Deuteronomy, you just get the 3. It leaves out the mind because in Hebrew, heart and mind are basically the same thing. It's a combined concept. But something occurred to me different about this verse. I've read it 1,000,000 times. I always thought, that just means give it your all. Give everything you got. And that's what it means, yes. But it's very specific to you, right? Because it's all your heart, not my heart, your heart. You may have more heart than me. You may have more soul than me, more mind than me, more strength. And do I know what all those things mean? No, I don't. I don't think it's the idea of what are all those things. I think the idea is that we're all different. I'm different than you. Mary's different than Martha. Martha loves Martha way, and Mary loves Mary way. And they're doing it the best they know how. I was going to say, well, Martha's the mind, and Mary's the heart. But I don't know. I just don't know. But I know they both love Jesus, and they both love him different. On to John 12. Mary then took a pound of very expensive perfume. Sounds a little bit like the other story. Of pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. A couple things that are interesting about that. I won't dwell on them too long. One thing about women in the first century, especially unmarried women, you do not want to be flaunting that hair around, because that hair was sort of considered a little bit improper. Like, oh, she's got really pretty hair. That was not, you wanted to cover that up. That was sort of the custom of the time. There's a verse, I can't remember, I think it's in 2 Corinthians. There's a verse about covering your hair or shaving your head. But an uncovered head at that time was a little bit frowned upon. And here she is exposing her hair and wiping the feet. Now, this is part of it when you if you have a harmony of Gospels, which is really helpful, especially when you're studying the life of Christ. I've tried to avoid it the whole time, but now that we're in this last part, I'm going to try to make sure we get all the details in the stories. In the harmony of the Gospels, the same story in Mark 14. While he was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, now this gives you a little bit more detail. They weren't at Martha's house this time. They're at the house of Simon the leper. You know, and David's thought on that is Simon the leper may have lived out of town. It might have been a safer place for him to be. And he was reclining at the table, and a woman came with an alabaster vial of very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke the vial and poured the perfume over his head. So why do we do the harmony of the Gospels here? Well, he got his head anointed and his feet. And she broke the vial. This is a very extravagant gift. And you think about this in the Bible, and why is that in there? How can we do anything like that? We can't prepare Jesus' body for burial. We cannot do these things. Jesus is not here with us physically. Is there any story in here for us? And you go back to Matthew 25. And in Matthew 25, we start out with, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And of course, the response is, "Well, when did I do this stuff?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." And I think that these big, huge, extravagant gifts still happen today. I mean, that people will support missionaries, or they'll pay for surgeries or chemotherapy. People will all these things I've witnessed. I've been fortunate to have friends that are generous, that have been good examples to me. But I've seen people do these great generous acts, and whenever I think of this, I think this is like what Mary is doing. This is a big, extravagant gesture, and they're doing it only because they love God. They're only doing it because they love God, and they want to show that love of God to people. And that is such an important part of it. This is what the whole hospitality thing is about. It's Christian lifestyle. And here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and throw in a little Zacchaeus, because he was a wee little man. And it's an interesting story. I forgot this part. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He is gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. A lot of Christianity, if you read between the lines here, it's all about being snobby and looking down at people. Those are always the bad guys. The good guys are the people that can look at the poor and eat with the poor and help the less fortunate. And those are the people that are always the good guys. Verse 8, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Hey, you know what happened? They had a dinner, and all of a sudden, Zacchaeus is giving away his money to the poor. This is a product of hospitality. I looked this up mainly because I was like going, well, I wanted to look up all the dinner parties that have been in the New Testament, and this one, I forgot about that. But Zacchaeus, he did a very merry thing, except we'll talk about the difference here. It's coming up. In John 12, verse 4, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he was about to betray him, said, Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Okay. And in Matthew 26, the interesting thing about Matthew 26, the reason I put that in there, is because Matthew 26 just says and when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. Now, all things being equal, if this had been a different time in Jesus' ministry, he might have agreed with him. But here's the thing about Judas. Don't forget this thing about Judas. Verse 6, Now he said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and he kept the money box. He used to steal from what was put into it. Another 300 denarii in the money box. You could get at least 50 probably in your pocket. He was really about stealing it, but like I said here, extravagant gifts are questioned by people who feel like there are more worthy causes. Judas at this point saw Jesus as not being worthy. And what does Jesus say in response to that? In verse 7, Jesus says, Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me. This is a special circumstance. What we're doing is preparing his body for burial. She's going to save the rest of that expensive perfume, use it for his burial. And remember what I said earlier. This is the time for the Son of Man to be glorified. These kind of acts are something that he's fine with now because he's wanting people to know who he is. In Matthew 26, they tell the same story, but in verse 13 it says, Truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And so this is clearly a significant thing. Jesus is really hyping it up here. So big, extravagant gifts are a great thing if you can do that. If you can do a big, extravagant gift, that's a great thing, in my opinion, just because of what Jesus says here in Matthew 26. But we all love differently. We are all individuals. How do you love? When you see Mary, she showed devotion as a female disciple. Now, that was also a little bit off book. Normally, rabbis didn't have female disciples. She was sitting right in front. Martha, she showed devotion by serving all of Jesus' disciples, which was a big bunch. Mary neglected serving. Martha neglected discipleship. Mary showed devotion through her generosity. Martha showed her devotion through her faith, through those acts of faith. Mary shows her love for Jesus. Martha brings her cares to Jesus. Don't forget that Martha is the one that brought her problems to Jesus. She talked to him when her brother was dead. She was the one that came and spoke to him. She's laying her cares on him. That is a very biblical principle. But the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing. We're about out of time, but when you go into John 12 at the end, on the next day when the large crowd had come to the feast, heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took the branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, indeed, the King of Israel." Hosanna means save us, we pray. Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it, and it is written, "Do not fear, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." But was it all kingship? In John 12:27, he says, "Now my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." This is just a little bit of the highlights. I'm going to go on. The thing that's interesting, what happens following this act of glorifying Jesus, preparing his body for burial? What happens next? John 13:1 says he loved them to the end, talking about his disciples. Jesus, knowing that the Father had handed all things over to him and that he had come from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid his outer garments aside. He took a towel and tied it around himself. Then he poured water in the basin and began washing the disciples' feet. Jesus, at the height of his glory as a king, he says, the greatest among you is going to be the one who serves. Verse 15, "For I gave you an example so that you would also do just as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is the one who sent greater than the one who sent him." Where is all this leading? It's leading towards this new commandment. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. It's kind of an interesting story if you follow it all the way through, because this is how Jesus treats his friends, and it's such a great example for us as Christians and how we should be. We need to be more like Jesus in these times and be willing to show our loves for one another. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.